right. All right. So we good. All right. All right. So we should be live on Facebook and on YouTube. All right. So thank you so much for joining us. Those of you joining us live on WhatsApp. Those who are joining us on Facebook. Let me just make sure you're getting. If you can hear the feed on Facebook, let us know. There are folks who are logged in on WhatsApp. Thank you for joining us. So let me just check the Facebook feed and we're going to get started. We're thankful for all those who connect with us. This is our first session for the year. On WhatsApp. All right, sounding good. Joining us. All right, so everything's sounding good, looking good. I'm waiting for the quorum to start. Giving God all the praise for all that He has done for us. We thank God. So, Father, this evening we are grateful for those who could connect with us, those who understand, the importance of study. The Bible says to study to show ourselves approved. And so even now we ask that you would, just guide us this evening. We are studying the book of Job, to understand, we talk about the patience of Job. And sometimes we don't fully understand what it truly means to go through that trial and go through that battle, go through that struggle, to be patient in situations, be patient in, trusting God, waiting on the Lord to help us through. And so it's good to have you guys locked in wherever you are around the world. This is our Bible study. For those of you who normally connect with us, thank you for taking the time to be with us. We have folks on Facebook. We have folks on YouTube. We have folks on WhatsApp, different spaces, different places. And so we're grateful for all who are connecting with us, whatever you're using, whatever format. Thank you for joining us. All right. And so we giving God all the praise, thanking God for all He's doing. We are declaring the favor of God in all this, that God is God and always will be God. We are speaking the hand of God. We are trusting God that all things will work together for good to those of us who love the Lord and who are called according to His purpose. And so we're doing it. Thank you so much for being part of our team. All right, so we talking about Job, and many of us know this story. We went through it earlier. Job was being tested. He was picked out. The Lord said, "Consider my servant Job." Remember my servant Job. You ever thought about him? It was a strange kind of scenario where the sons of God, meaning the angels, were given a report. And anybody who don't believe that angels have to report, this is one scenario that, portrays that. The fact that Job is one of the oldest books in the Bible gives a lot of validity to some of the things that were happening. And, even in all that, there was a lot of understanding that needs to take place. Some people see the poetry in Job because Job is written in prose for those who understand poetry. Those of us who are not so um, competent with poetry. We may not fully understand what it is. Things like allegory and prose and things that we use in order to convey messages. And, Job is a grand book, and there's a lot you could learn from it. You really cannot exhaust it because, there's just so much. There are many questions. Why Jesus allows Satan to tempt Job that way? Why, it answers a lot of questions that, as a believer, that we are protected, that, God has his hand over us. And so in order for the enemy to attack us, he had to get permission from God. And so if the enemy get permission, it means that God has something that he wants in us to fulfill. God has something that whatever that we're going through, there has to be purpose to it. And so we understand that. We understand that there are things in life that we have to go through. All of us have to go through something one time or the other. All of us have to go through some trials. And if we are honest with ourselves, the trials we go through sometimes is necessary. Because, in order for you to fulfill the purpose in your life, you have to go through these trials. All right? At the end of the day, God is God, and, He fights for us, and He wants to give us all that we need, in order to come against the enemy. All that we need in order to be victorious. And it's like, if you keep handicapping people, if you keep doing for them everything, they don't get to build their own spiritual muscles. And so you could see your trial as team building, the trouble you're going through, and overcome it. And sometimes when you have fully overcome something, when you had something, it was a real challenge and you overcome, you feel good within yourself that I overcame it. And so we saw Job going through these trials, going through these battles, and we look into the life of Job, how every week he would pray for his children because he wanted to serve God, but his children want to party. And many of us could identify with that. We could identify with, your children want to party. Right? Sometimes you don't fully understand why. You want to serve the Lord. You wish they would serve the Lord. You wish that they would do the right thing. But all they want to do is to lie, to party, to fed. Many parents, especially around now, praying for their children because it's fete after fete after fete. And there's no guarantee, that your children will come home. So at the end of the day, you as a parent, you had to go through that whole waiting and praying and Lord cover them. Job was one of the first parents who had to go through those things. Every week, each children fetted. And Job said, Lord, just in case they blaspheme against you, he would offer sacrifice to the Lord, just in case. And many of us know how to pray them just in case prayer. Lord, just in case my son do something foolish at school, Lord, keep him, cover him. Many of us have had to have these just in case kind of prayers, to cover our children and to, hope the very best for them. And so, well, of course, when the temptation come, it was severe. First, Job lost all his wealth, all his servants, and eventually all his children. And Job was gracious in saying, the Lord gives and the Lord take away. Blessed be the name of the Lord. And, we all have difficulty dealing with loss. All right? You want to know, but why it happened to me? Why me? And sometimes you have to ask yourself, why not you? The only reason it happened to you, just like Job, is because God felt that it was necessary for you to go through that. That somebody going to be delivered because of you. Somebody going to get, life will be better because of what you've been through. Job's trials, brought, wisdom to his friends, because they came thinking that, he must have done something wrong, especially when the first set of trouble didn't face Job. But the second set, when Satan started to afflict his body and put pain, Job started, he started to say, Lord, kill me. No, I can't take this. You start to see chinks in Job's armor. And, one songwriter says, how much we could bear. How much we could bear. None of us know it. But I hazard, I guess, to say many of us surprise ourselves how much we could bear. How many of us think we'd still be standing after all? When you think about some of the trials that you've been through and the tragedy, you're still standing, you're still serving God. There are things that it just baffles you. For those of us who understand, the battles that we had to face. It wasn't easy, but you're still standing. There had to be purpose. Your children, your husband, your wife, your losses, COVID take out some, and you still standing. And sometimes you want to know, but why me, boy? What it is that I have to fulfill. And God knows. All of us have purpose. All of us think. And so we see Job's friends, just like good friends, they came and they mourned with him for a little while. And then they started questioning, why you're going through all this. You had to do something wrong. Nobody can go get all that kind of, pressure in their life if you didn't do something wrong. And so, Job friends started, after they mourned with him for about 7 days, they started question and they started criticize him, And one of his friends, I'm going to go back to chapter 5 of Job chapter 5, when, one of his friends, Eliphaz, began to explain the cause of Job's trouble. You always have people who think they know what you're going through. They always have people who think they understand, the reason why this happened to you is because of. But not everything you go through, could be explained. Some people don't fully understand some of the trials that you go through, that, sometimes it's just a testing. And sometimes the testing does come from God. Sometimes we blaming the devil and telling the enemy, that devil is a liar. Satan, look what you're doing. When is God? I know Satan might go on plenty time in that meeting. And maybe that is why he does go up in that meeting to complain. The Bible says he's the accuser of the brethren. So Them always calling my name. Lord, it's you who do that. You allow that to happen. You tell me to go and do that. And now I get the blame. And so often Satan is getting blamed for things that the Lord has allowed to happen in our lives because it was necessary. Sometimes we don't fully understand that God is God, and sometimes he does what he needs to do. It's good to have you guys locked in with us from all around the world. Good to have Pastor Jesse Sutton with us. Good to have you locked in. Folks who are locked in on the Facebook and the WhatsApp, as we do our Bible study, we're grateful because in the midst of it, God is God and he fights our battles. He does what he needs to do in our lives. And so often we have to recognize, the goodness of our God, what he does for us. And so Eliphaz begins to explain. Much people just think they could explain God. We can't explain God. His ways are higher than our ways. His thoughts are higher than our thoughts. There are things that, in the hand of God that I don't understand. I don't know if you're like me. Some of you probably understand everything God doing, but like me, I don't understand everything the Lord is doing. Sometimes it don't make no sense to me, to my finite, small brain. But God in his majesty and his omnipotence, he allows things to happen. And we don't see it until the end. But God sees the end from the beginning. So he already knew what would have been the outcome. Why you end up where you end up. And one thing does lead to another. And what you have to believe, as the scripture says, that all things work together for good to them that love the Lord. And so we're looking at Eliphaz's explanation and talking about the faith of the foolish man. And there's a lot of people out there who think that they're bright. A lot of people think that they have it all together when they are foolish in their ways. Eliphaz begins to say, he appeals to Job's common sense, common wisdom as it's called, but we in the Caribbean, we call it common sense. Hey, it only makes sense if all this thing happening to you, it means that you had to do something wrong. That is only said. And so he says, call out now. Is there anyone who will answer you? And which of the holy ones will you turn? For wrath kills a foolish man, and envy slays a simple one. Anger or wrath does kill a foolish man. And you see that all the time. Somebody gave you a bad drive on the road. You get so vexed that you speed up behind the man who gave the bad drive. God get in an altercation. Right? The man take out a gun and shoot you, or whatever as the case may be. You're dead. What's the sense of that? To prove a point that you're not a walkover and nobody could just take advantage of you, but you're dead. Right? So that kind of unbridled anger will cause people to lose their life, to spend years in prison doing something that, you rest of your life locked up behind bars because you can't control your anger. And so Job's friend is explaining, maybe some of the reasons why, this thing happening to you. And he said, listen, you could cry out to whoever you want to cry out because nobody listened to you. You had to be, which one, are the angels going to be listening to you in your state? He said, envy, the slay, a simple one. And that is so true. There are people who envy others. And it had to be people who are simple, because when you understand that in this life, whatever people have, you can achieve it if you work hard at it. You know, you don't have no need to envy people. You know, what they have is they have, because you don't know how they get it. And so Job is one of those books that reminds us, hey, you know, these friends of Job, you know, using all this wisdom to try to explain. You know, Job probably was an intellectual, probably was well known and well respected. His friends were probably of people of high, you know, excellence, and because he was quite a wealthy man. So wealthy people attract wealthy people as friends, you know. And so he says, you know, hear what his, Eliphaz is saying to Job. I have seen the foolish taking root, but suddenly I cursed his dwelling place, and his sons are far from safety. They are crushed in the gates, and there is no deliverer, because the hungry eat up his harvest, taking it even from the thorns, and a snare snatches their substance. But affliction does not come from the dust, nor does trouble spring from the ground. Yet man is born to trouble, as the sparks fly upwards. In other words, once you're living on this earth, trouble will find you. And, you know, we just came out of our time of Holy Convocation, our time of fasting, our time of being in the presence of the Lord. And for the year, you know, at the beginning of the year, we sow our first fruits. The first fruit is a sacrificial giving that, you know, is not your tithes, not your offering, but it's a sacrifice that you give to the Lord. Say, Lord, here's my sacrifice. This thing I want to give to you, you know. And we call it putting that first seed in the ground, that first fruit in the ground. Because you can't eat your entire harvest. You know, otherwise you will starve to death. Because there has to be something that goes in the ground for the next month or the next year or the next harvest. And if you eat everything, you know, in one go, and you will have nothing else to plant. And so we tell people, don't eat everything. Put something on the ground. Put it in good soil. Put it in something that brings honor to God. And watch how that investment, that seed will bring back a harvest. You know. He says his sons, you know, in the first part, he says, your sons are far from safety. And we know what happened to Job's son, right? You know, they all perished. All his children, all his children perish. So that is a kind of backhand way of telling Job, hey, you see what happened to your children? You know, for many of us, when you look and you see, you know, parents who have lost sons, maybe to violence, to gangs who get shot, you know, nobody, even after the loss, wants to hear that, you know, your son look for that, you know, what he doing liming with them fellas. Nobody wants to hear that because you're grieving. All right. But Job's friends are telling him that Job in the pain, he grieving, but they're telling him, you see, look, you know, they quoting this proverb and saying, you know, his sons are far from safety. You know, they quoting this reference. And Eliphaz is speaking from his own experience because he says, I have seen. You know, I have seen. You know, these are things that you know, I see with my eyes. And we use that all the time, you know. I see what's going on here, you know. You know, speaking of your own experiences and his observation of life. And in understanding that, you know, in those eastern cities and possibly in those times, the justice tribunal or the courts, was usually at the gates of the city. That's where the people would sit and judge matters. People would come for justice. And, so he says his sons are far from safety. They are crushed in the gate, and there is no deliverer. He goes on to say, listen, this thing ain't just come so. Affliction don't just come from the dust. There had to be, something that caused this affliction to come onto your physical body. Something opened the door. Many times we look at situations and we say, you know what? This thing ain't singing right, This ain't just come just so. And so often when we understand, what that whole idea of, things just happening, as we just say, somebody opened the door. We use that all the time. Somebody, was doing something that caused this to happen. And truth be told, many times, some of the affliction that come to us and come into our homes is because somebody opened the door. Most of our experiences are for sickness and other things to come over us. Somebody opened the door for it. Somebody caused, this thing to happen. And sometimes you have to recognize that, that you have to check yourself, before you make any, kind of assertions about things. Sometimes you have to check yourself and to see whether there was something or someone that opened the door that allowed this kind of, thing in your life. And for many of us, it might be a member of your family. Sometimes it might be arrangements, spiritual arrangements, that your father, your grandparents, some people were offered up, in the Caribbean, we say offered up. That is when they had a ritual, when you were born. There are people whose hands are dirty, and they're involved in strange practices, and they open that door. The wages of sin will always be there. And people who are involved, in any kind of witchcraft, and we are a country steeped in that, whether it work or it didn't work, anytime something wrong with each children, the first thing we want to do is carry them by the Obia man or the Obia woman, to get them a bush bath and some kind of, remedy like that. And then when it gets worse, and when all hell breaks loose, then they just come by the pastor. So pastor is the last stop. After they try everything and they use the blue soap and they, do the bush bath, because it does feel good. It's like a quick fix. You pay your money to the Obia man and to get your fix. But it don't fix. Satan will never come up against Satan. A house divided against itself will never stand. So, it's just a whole thing. And so, he says, yet man is born to trouble. And I want you to understand, the understanding is that we sow trouble, and trouble does reap trouble. All right? Sometimes members of your family bring trouble in your house. They interfere with people things. They are part of gangs, and they bring trouble in your house. You know. And Eliphaz now, he begins to, defend his God. And he says, but as for me, if I was you, let me put it in all the terms. Eliphaz is saying, hey, this thing ain't just happened just so. Something opened the door for all that you're going through. Something opened that door. Something caused, right? But you see me? Yeah, here's what he says. In verses 8 through 16 of Job chapter 5. He says, but as for me, I will seek God. If it was me, I will call on God. If it was me, you see me? And that sounds, very religious and scriptural and biblical. When they're in trouble, go to God. That's basically what he's saying. And to God, I will commit my cause. I will make my case before the Lord. I will tell the Lord, this is me. And that sounds good. That's good advice. And when you look at this book of Job, you see good advice. You're going through your trouble, you're going through your trial, you're going through your pain, your loss. Seek God. That's good advice. Who does great things and unsearchable and marvelous things without numbers. So Eliphaz now is making a boast in his God, and that's a good thing. He said he gives rain on the earth. He sends waters in the field. He reminded Job, like if Job didn't know. He sets on high those who are lowly, and those who mourn are lifted to safety. He says he frustrates the devices of the crafty. I'm grateful for that part. Crafty, as I explained some time ago, craft, when they're using the term craft, means to bend or to manipulate. It's like witchcraft, right? To witch means to bend. And craft is the method, is the skill in bending. And that's what witchcraft is. To manipulate, to cause things to move, to cause people's minds to change. Witchcraft, to bend them to your way. There are people who are very good at doing witchcraft, and it's not, as we know it, Obia, but they could change your mind. They could turn you around, And so, when he's talking about the craft, he frustrates the devices of the crafty. Them who work in their witchcraft, God does frustrate them. You know much people who try to work witchcraft on you and get frustrated because they can't understand why it ain't working? Because God covering you. And when you're under the blood of Jesus, they could do what they want. And so I don't know why people just get so frightened. Pastor, this one doing that. And when I come, I see a cloth and I see something under my door and that's one show a flag. Come on. Let them do the craft. Right? God will frustrate them because the more they work the craft, it ain't working against you. When they meant it for evil against you and you doing good. You understand? Favor following you. Blessing following you. Joy following you. Like, at the end of the day, you're seeing the hand of God. You're seeing the promises of God. Favor, the blessing is coming over your life. Look what the Lord has done. That's what, and so this is good. He says, so their hands cannot carry out their plan. He frustrates the devices of the crafty. So they cannot carry out their plans. They cannot complete their enterprise. You understand? If it was up to them, they would try. Most people try things, but you are standing this evening because they try and it didn't work. Because God covering you. and whom God blessed, no man could curse. I hope you understand. So we learning this from Job's friend. Job's friend talking wisdom here. It's sounding good. It's sounding good. He says he catches the wise in their own craftiness. Right? The ones who doing the witchcraft. And the counsel of the cunning comes quickly after them. Right? In other words, they think they're that bright. He says they meet with darkness in the daytime. Wow. And they grope at noontime as in the night. In other words, they themselves know where they're going. They themselves know what they're doing. He saves the needy from the sword and from the mouth of the mighty and from their hand. So the poor have hope, and injustice shuts her mouth. And so you understand, what Eliphaz is saying, that the reason why Job is going through what he's going through because he's not seeking the Lord enough. He ain't praying enough. You ever meet when you're going through a situation in your life and people tell you, well, you need to seek the Lord and pray like if he wasn't praying all the time. Right? They don't fully understand that sometimes is a battle that you have to just go through. It's a trial that God testing you with because favor is coming. Sometimes it's the enemy, sometimes it's not. And so sometimes people are very insensitive to what you're actually going through. But I'm grateful that God knows, in 1 Corinthians chapter 3, and verse 19, Paul uses this part of Job in his sermon to the Corinthians, verse 19 of 1 Corinthians chapter 3 says, for the wisdom of this world is foolishness with God. For it is written, he catches the wise in their own craftiness. In other words, it is written where? In Job chapter 5. And, and it is written that he catches them in their own craftiness. So Paul is saying, hey, he quotes Job. Job is a book of wisdom, is a book of poetry for the most part, but it's a book of wisdom. And then so Eliphaz now begins to attribute Job's suffering to God chastening for the sins in his life. And that is an easy explanation that everybody, could jump on that bandwagon. It's sin in your life. That's why you have to go through that. God trying to chasten you and to get you right. They didn't know the backstory, that it was a test. They didn't know the backstory. The Lord allowed Satan to prove his reliance, his confidence, in Job, And sometimes the testing, what we go through, sometimes is for God to prove his, that the fact that, you could handle it, And so he begins to say, behold, happy is the man whom the Lord corrects or whom the Lord chastens. Now, I don't know about you, but when the chastening comes, you don't feel happy at all. I don't know about you, but the chastening is grievous, trust me. When, as we just say in the Caribbean, when you get a good cut skin from the Lord, you don't want to talk to nobody, all the, we don't smile after we get it, We don't, we don't say, oh, God, I thank you. Sometimes we vex, but it's for your good. You know that all things work together for good. Nobody is like a cut skin, as we just say down here in the Caribbean. Nobody is like that chastening. It grievous. It wouldn't be a chastening if it was something everybody smiling. As a matter of fact, I saw a guy, write on, I think he's an African guy, but he wrote on, what we just get licks for. You understand? We just get licks for when, your parents gave you licks and you're not screaming enough. You're getting belt and you just stand up and smiling or watching your parent. You're getting more licks. He says, children, you could get licks for standing up in the presence of big people. So big people talking and you right there in their presence listening, you're getting licks for that. You'll get licks if you're standing and you're sitting among big people, you'll get licks. You'll get licks for if you take too long, they send you to the shop and you take too long to come back, licks. You get licks if you come back too late from playing with your friends. You'll get licks. You get licks to go outside and play with your friends if you're only inside the house. So it's like everything is meant for you to get licks. And, and the chastening is not a nice thing. The Bible says, for he bruises. He says, therefore do not despise the chastening of the Lord, right? Don't despise that. That's not something that as much as it's grievous, don't hate it. At the end, it is do good. For he bruises, but he binds up. In other words, it has caused injury, but he does help you mend. He wounds, but his hands make whole. In other words, he ain't leaving you wounded. He says, he shall deliver you in 6 troubles. In other words, in 7, no evil will touch you. Because, sometimes some of us just take a little while to learn. And so you had to get licks a couple times before, you catch on. He says, in famine, he will redeem you from death. And in war, from the power of the sword. You shall be hidden from the scourge of the tongue. And you shall not be afraid of destruction when it comes. You shall laugh at destruction and famine. You shall not be afraid of the beasts of the north, for you shall have a covenant with the stones of the field. And the beasts of the field shall be at peace with you, and you shall know that your tent is in peace. It says, you shall visit your dwelling and find nothing missing. And you shall also know that your descendants shall be many, and your offspring like the grass of the earth, and you shall come to the grave at a full age, as a sheaf of grain ripens in its season. And, these are things that we have to speak over ourselves. And you could even use this as, declaration, right? Before there was declaration and books on declaration, this is, could be put forth as a declaration. And you're making, you're making that kind of boast in your God. And so you say, happy is the man whom the Lord corrects. Happy is the man. And so don't despise the chastening of the Lord. And we tell people that all the time. We let them know, hey, I know you're going through some things right now, but don't feel bad about it. Don't think it's oh God, chastening me and it's only me and only me. Don't despise that. There's something that God is bringing out of you. And it doesn't be easy. It gonna be grievous. But when you come through on the other side, it's like, training for your ideal weight. Like fasting sometimes. First couple days of fasting, you feel you're dead. You understand? Because you no food. You understand? And that's when every food does start to smell good. It's like torture. But you're trying to hold true to your fast. But then when you see the unexpected, unintended benefits of it, you're a little bit healthier, you're a little bit lighter, you lose some weight. And when you're into your fast, food is no longer, such a craving no more. And, you can handle it. And you see, when you go on the scales, you lost a couple pounds. And sometimes, if you have little high things like pressure and sugar and what the other things we just have, sometimes when when you look back at them thing, it will start to look better, because now you're all the food that has caused all the problems, it gone. And so sometimes you recognize that, listen, things better, but of course we can't maintain it. You understand? Because we just go back after the time of fasting is over. And so, Eliphaz is making that, that correlation that Job's situation is the chastening of God in his life for the sins in his life. But chastening is not always because of sin. See, sometimes chastening is to prevent us from sinning. Sometimes God does correct us and instruct us. And so he says, listen, and this declaration, he says, you shall, when he goes on to say, you shall be hidden from the scourge of the tongue, and you shall not be afraid of destruction when it comes. You shall laugh at destruction and famine. In other words, even though everything 1,000 on one side, 10,000 on the other side, you understand, you have the confidence that your God is going to take you through. He says, you will have a covenant with the stones of the field. And many of us who understand, that covenant with the stones of the field, when you're in the wild, or you're in a place and animals want to rush you, you understand? What does do? If a dog, you're walking the street and a dog want to rush you, the first thing you do is looking for a big stone, something to pelt that dog, because let's be real, nobody taking bite. You understand? And so the stones, the Bible says, he's saying there's a covenant with the stones of the field. In other words, whatever come against you, you have enough to deal with them. They can't touch you. And so, we understand that, he says, you shall come to the grave at a full age. And so tonight, I pray this over you, that you will come to the grave at a full age, that you would not die before your time, that, this is a declaration. We will all die, death is inevitable, but you would live until you die. So you ain't coming to that grave until you have done your time. You speak, you would not come prematurely. A sheaf of grain ripens in its season. You're not coming before your time. You will not force ripe. It has some mango that you're watching, when it now start to develop and your eye on it, and then it fall before it start to get ripe. You understand? That will not happen to you. And so Eliphaz begins to declare that confidence in his God. In his final statement, he said, behold, this we have searched and it's true. Hear and know for yourself. In other words, Eliphaz is saying, listen, I telling you my experience. I'm telling you what I've been through, and this is it. Listen to what I'm saying and know it for yourself. And in the midst of it, this, we always have situations, we always have battles, and we always have people who think they know what we're going through. And, and this might sound like good advice from a friend, but Eliphaz made one assumption in thinking that Job was at fault for what he was going through, but he wasn't. Because Eliphaz didn't know the backstory, of all that happened in heaven and all that, desires. So sometimes people don't know, why you're going through what you're going through. And sometimes they make assumptions based on that. But God is the one who has the final say. And so thank you this evening for joining us in our Bible study. As chapter 5, we'll as we continue in the book of Job, to get an understanding of, and we try to relate it back to where we are. And Job has a lot of wisdom in it. There are two books that, to me, I consider the books of wisdom. Is Job and the book of Ecclesiastes, Solomon's wisdom. There's a lot, that we can grasp from it. So I just want to encourage you to read the book. Read the book. This is a grand book. It's one of the oldest books in the Bible, right? And that's why the New Testament could quote it. And I know the New Testament quotes some of the books of prophecy as well, because those books were written long before the Old Testament. So sometimes we're grateful for it. And so, guys, thank you so much for joining us for this evening's Bible study. Thank you for being part of that. We'll continue again next week, Tuesday. We're doing Bible study because we shouldn't be anywhere, right? Although, right, Larry, I had to watch Ole though. I think I had to bring Ole on camera or whatever, because some Ole I had to watch Ole. Right? We shouldn't be anywhere. We haven't Bible study, right? So if you can't join the Bible study, I might have an issue. I might have to take a roll call next week Tuesday. Right? For those of you who are abroad, next week Tuesday is Carnival Tuesday. It's fete and thing all around town, mass. Right? And so the believers should be studying the Word of God, not, anywhere else. So I trust, that you all would be joining me, all right, on Bible study online, and nobody is found in places that they shouldn't be. And these days, the camera catching people all over. You understand? You can pretend and hide. And just because you hiding, the cameraman looking for you, you make sure why this person hiding, right? You on full screen. So we expect to have the full complement of people in our Bible study next Tuesday at 6 p.m. So have a wonderful week. Amen. Look forward to having you tomorrow. We down in San Fernando for our deliverance service at 11:30, Coffee Street, 102 Coffee Street, right behind Skiffle Bunch. You might get a lot of pan tomorrow. I don't know, but we'll have service. And on Thursday in Port of Spain, back in Port of Spain, we close off on Thursday. After the 11 o'clock service on Thursday, we close off for the week and we come back the following Thursday in Port of Spain, or the following Wednesday in San Fernando. All right, no service on Sunday, no service Sunday evening. All right, take that time off to be with your family and not in the tongue. Stay away from any semblance, because sometimes even on the road, people could be going about their business, doing the right thing, and some uncircumcised Philistine, some driver who, shouldn't be driving, intoxicated, and innocent people gone. So I'm hoping, let me stay off the road as we best we possibly can. That is not the time to go, hitting beach and hitting this and hitting that, carnival. Sometimes the road does just be crazy. On a Monday, if you trying to go Monday, it's people coming off a Juve and, whole night they drunk. And, it is just be too much of craziness. Tuesday, it just, sometimes it's just to stay off the road and, come back out, early Wednesday. And most of them going to, to cool off or whatever. So God bless you. Have a wonderful evening, and we will meet next Tuesday at 6 p.m. for another Bible study. All right, guys, take care. Bless it. All right, blessings. Yeah, take care, guys. All right.